I got angry almost every day. I shouted at people I loved. I broke things when I could not control myself. One day, I saw fear in my mother's eyes. That was the day everything started to change. When I was a child, people often said I had a bad temper. I hated hearing those words. Every time someone said them, I became even angrier. My name is Emma. If things did not go the way I wanted, I got upset. If someone disagreed with me, I got upset. If I made a mistake, I got upset. It felt like a fire lived inside me, and that fire was always ready to burn. One afternoon I came home from school. I threw my backpack onto the floor. My mother looked at me from the kitchen. "How was school?" she asked. I crossed my arms. "Fine." But it was not fine. A girl in my class had laughed when I gave a wrong answer. Maybe she was not even laughing at me. But that was what I believed. The whole day I felt embarrassed. The feeling stayed in my chest like a heavy stone. My mother walked closer. Did something happen? I did not want to talk. I wanted the feeling to disappear. "Leave me alone," I shouted. My mother looked surprised. She stepped back. For a moment I felt guilty, but then the anger came back. It always came back. That night I locked myself in my room. I kicked a chair. I threw a book onto the floor. The noise made me feel powerful for a few seconds. Then I felt empty again. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall. I did not understand myself. Why was I always angry? Why did small things hurt so much? Why did everything feel unfair? The next day at school, things got worse. During group work, one boy told me my idea was not very good. Maybe he was trying to help. Maybe he was being honest. But I heard something different. I heard, "You are not good enough." The fire inside me exploded. "What do you know?" I yelled. The classroom became quiet. Everyone looked at me. The teacher quickly walked over. "Emma, calm down." But I could not. My face felt hot. My heart was beating fast. I grabbed my notebook and pushed my chair back. The sound echoed across the room. Nobody spoke. For the rest of the day, I sat alone. No one came to talk to me. No one smiled at me. I told myself I did not care. But deep inside, I did. I cared a lot. When I got home, my mother was waiting for me. The school had called her. She looked tired. Not angry. Just tired. That somehow made me even more upset. "Why can't you just behave?" she asked softly. The question hit me harder than a shout. I felt something break inside me. "You don't understand me," I screamed. I grabbed a pillow from the sofa and threw it across the room. Then I slammed my bedroom door. A few minutes later, I opened the door again. I wanted to get some water. As I walked past the living room, I stopped. My mother was sitting alone on the couch. Her head was down. Her shoulders were shaking. She was crying. I had seen my mother cry before, but this felt different. She looked hurt, not because of life, because of me. Then she looked up. For a second, our eyes met. I saw something I had never noticed before. Fear. Not fear of danger. Fear of my anger. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of making me explode again. My stomach tightened. I suddenly felt very small. I went back to my room and closed the door quietly. No shouting, no slamming, no anger. I sat on the floor. The house was silent. For the first time, I did not feel angry at my mother. I did not feel angry at school. I did not feel angry at the world. I only felt sad. Very sad. I hugged my knees and stared at the dark floor. A question slowly appeared in my mind. A question I had never asked before. If my anger was hurting everyone around me, was it hurting me too? That night, I could not sleep. And for the first time in my life, I began to wonder if the problem was not the world. Maybe the problem was the pain I had been carrying inside all along. The next morning, I woke up with heavy eyes. I had barely slept. The image of my mother crying stayed in my mind. I wished I could forget it, but I couldn't. It followed me everywhere. At breakfast, we sat across from each other. The room was quiet. Usually I would complain about something. The food, the weather, school, anything. But that morning, I said nothing. My mother said nothing too. Before leaving, she smiled at me. It was a small smile, a careful smile, as if she was afraid to say too much. That hurt more than I expected. I wanted things to feel normal again, but I did not know how. At school, I noticed something strange. Or maybe it was not strange. Maybe it had always been there. I was just seeing it clearly for the first time. When students formed groups, nobody called my name. When people laughed together, I was not part of the circle. When lunch came, every table seemed full, except the empty seat beside me. I told myself I liked being alone. That was the story I always used. But deep down, I knew it was not true. I did not want to be alone. I just did not know how to stay close to people. Every friendship felt like holding a glass cup. Sooner or later, I dropped it. Sooner or later, it broke. The only person who still stayed close to me was Lily. We had been friends for years. She was kind, patient, and calm. She smiled easily. She listened carefully. She was everything I was not. One afternoon we sat together during lunch. For a while things felt normal. Then a boy from our class walked past our table. He pointed at my messy notebook. "Wow, Emma, your bag looks like a tornado lives inside it." A few students laughed. The comment was harmless. At least it should have been. But I felt the familiar fire rise inside me. The heat moved from my chest to my face. Before I could stop myself, I stood up. "What is your problem?" I shouted. The cafeteria became quiet. The boy looked shocked. I was joking. Well, it wasn't funny. I pushed my chair back so hard that it almost fell. People stared. Again, always staring, always watching me lose control. Lily gently touched my arm. "Emma, it's okay." I pulled my arm away. "No, it's not okay." The words came out louder than I wanted. Lily looked down. I could see the sadness in her eyes. But I was too angry to stop. I grabbed my lunch tray and walked away. The rest of the afternoon felt terrible. The anger disappeared quickly. It always did. But embarrassment stayed much longer. After school, Lily asked if we could talk. We walked to a small park near the school. The sun was low in the sky. Children played nearby. Dogs ran across the grass. Everything felt peaceful. Everything except me. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then Lily took a deep breath. "Can I tell you something?" I nodded. She looked nervous. That was unusual. Lily was rarely nervous. "Emma," she said softly, "I'm always afraid of making you angry." Her words hit me like cold water. I stared at her. "What?" She looked at the ground. "Sometimes I think about every word before I say it." I felt my chest tighten. She continued, "Sometimes I want to tell you how I feel, but I'm scared you'll yell at me." The park suddenly felt very quiet. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say she was wrong. But I couldn't, because she wasn't wrong. Every memory came rushing back. The times I shouted, the times I slammed doors, the times I blamed everyone else. Lily looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I care about you," she said, "but being around you can be exhausting." Those words hurt, not because they were cruel, because they were true. For years, I thought people left because they did not understand me. For years, I believed I was the victim. But standing there beside my best friend, I saw something different. People were not leaving because they hated me. They were leaving because I hurt them. Not with my fists, not with my hands, with my anger, with my words, with my reactions. For the first time I saw myself through someone else's eyes, and I did not like what I saw. Lily gently squeezed my hand. I know you're not a bad person. A tear rolled down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away. I don't know why I'm like this, I whispered. Lily's voice became softer. You don't have to figure it out today. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moved through the trees. Children laughed in the distance. Life continued around us. But something inside me had changed. That night, I sat alone in my room. No music, no television, no phone, just silence. I thought about my mother. I thought about Lily. I thought about all the people who slowly disappeared from my life. Then, for the first time in years, I cried. Not because someone hurt me, not because life felt unfair. I cried because I finally understood something. I was lonely, very lonely. And little by little, I had built that loneliness myself. As tears filled my eyes, another question appeared in my mind. If anger was not the real problem, then what was hiding underneath it? After my talk with Lily, I tried to change. At least, I wanted to. But wanting to change and knowing how to change were two different things. The problem was still there. The anger still lived inside me. Sometimes it slept quietly. Sometimes it woke up without warning. And when it did, it felt stronger than me. Years passed. I finished high school and started college. My life looked better from the outside. I got good grades. I had a part-time job. I made a few new friends. People thought I was doing well. But inside, I still felt tired. Very tired. I was tired of fighting. Tired of feeling hurt. Tired of being angry at things that seemed small to everyone else. One afternoon, everything went wrong. I had a difficult week. Too much homework. Too little sleep. Too many worries. Then I received a message from a classmate. We were working on a project together. The message said, I think we should use someone else's idea. That was all. A simple sentence, nothing rude, nothing mean. But my chest tightened immediately. The old voice returned. The voice I knew too well. Your ideas are not good enough. People don't respect you. Nobody listens to you. By the time I reached my apartment, I was furious. I threw my bag onto the floor. I paced around the room. I wanted to send an angry message. I wanted to argue. I wanted someone else to feel the pain I was feeling. But before I could do anything, I remembered Lily. I remembered my mother. I remembered all the people I had hurt before. So instead of sending the message, I left the apartment. I walked without thinking. Past busy streets, past coffee shops, past people rushing home. Eventually, I reached a small park. The same park where Lily and I had talked years ago. I sat on a wooden bench. The sun was beginning to set. Orange light covered the grass. Birds moved between the trees. Everything looked peaceful. But my mind was not. I stared at the ground. The anger was still there. Then someone sat down beside me. An old man. His hair was white. His clothes were simple. In his hands was a small bag of bird food. He scattered a few seeds onto the ground. Several birds quickly gathered around him. For a while, neither of us spoke. I was grateful for the silence. Then the old man smiled. Long day. I let out a small laugh. Very long. He nodded. Those are usually the days when people come to this park. I looked at him. How do you know? He pointed at the bench. I'd been sitting here for years. That made me smile. The old man fed another handful of seeds to the birds. Then he asked, "Are you angry at someone?" I was surprised. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckled. "A little." I looked away. "I'm angry all the time." The words escaped before I could stop them. The old man nodded slowly, as if he had heard those words before, maybe many times. Then he said something I would never forget. "Anger is often sadness wearing armor." I blinked. "What does that mean?" He watched the birds for a moment. Then he answered, "When people are sad, they feel vulnerable." I listened quietly. "When people are hurt, they feel weak." He tossed another seed. "But anger feels strong. So many people hide their sadness behind anger." His words settled deep inside me. I thought about my childhood, the shouting, the fighting, the loneliness, the fear. Could he be right? The old man continued, "When I was young, I had a terrible temper." I looked at him, surprised. "You?" He laughed. "Very hard to believe, isn't it?" I nodded. He smiled. "I lost friends because of it." The smile faded slightly. "I hurt people I loved." That sounded familiar. Too familiar. Then he looked directly at me. "People think angry people want to fight." His voice became gentle. "But many times they just want someone to understand their pain." For a moment I couldn't speak. My eyes filled with tears. Not because I was sad, because I felt understood. Nobody had ever described me that way before. Not as a bad person, not as a problem, just as someone carrying pain. The old man noticed my silence. "You've been hurt before, haven't you?" I swallowed hard. Then I nodded. Memories flashed through my mind. The times I felt rejected, the times I felt invisible, the times I believed I was not enough. Maybe I had been carrying those feelings for years. Maybe they had never left. The old man stood up slowly. The birds scattered around his feet. Before leaving, he smiled. "You don't have to fight every feeling." I looked up. "What should I do instead?" He pointed gently toward my chest. "Listen to it." Then he walked away. I sat there long after he left. The sun disappeared. The sky grew dark. For the first time in my life, I stopped asking, "Why am I so angry?" And I started asking a different question, a much more important one. What is my anger trying to protect? As I walked home that night, I felt something new. Not happiness, not peace, but understanding. And understanding felt like the first small step toward healing. After meeting the old man in the park, I could not stop thinking about his words. Anger is often sadness wearing armor. For days, those words stayed in my mind. At first, I did not fully understand them, but little by little, things became clearer. I began to notice what happened before I got angry. Something always came first. A feeling, a fear, a memory. The anger was never the beginning, it was the reaction. One evening, I was working on a group project. A classmate looked at my work and said, "I think this part needs some changes." Years ago, those words would have started a fight. I would have heard criticism, I would have heard rejection, I would have heard, "You're not good enough." But this time I paused. I took a slow breath. Then I asked myself, what am I feeling right now? The answer surprised me. I was not angry. I was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of disappointing people. Afraid of not being enough. The anger had only arrived afterward. I saw the difference. It felt like turning on a light in a dark room. I could finally see what had always been there. The changes did not happen overnight. I still got angry sometimes. I still made mistakes. There were days when I wanted to shout. Days when I wanted to slam doors. Days when old habits returned. But now I noticed them. And that made all the difference. Whenever I felt anger rising, I tried something new. Instead of reacting immediately, I walked away for a few minutes. Sometimes I sat alone. Sometimes I took a short walk. Sometimes I simply stayed quiet. Not because I wanted to avoid people, because I wanted to understand myself first. One night I bought a notebook. On the first page I wrote, "What am I really feeling?" Every time I became upset, I wrote down my thoughts. At first the pages were messy, the sentences were short, the handwriting was uneven. But slowly patterns appeared. Many entries looked the same. I felt ignored. I felt embarrassed. I felt rejected. I felt afraid. Very few pages actually said, "I felt angry." That realization shocked me. For years, anger had been the loudest voice. But it was never the deepest one. As the months passed, I also started doing something much harder. I began to apologize. The word sorry had always felt uncomfortable. It felt like losing. It felt like admitting weakness. But I was wrong. Apologizing required courage. One weekend, I sat with my mother at the kitchen table. She was making tea, the same way she had done for years. The room smelled warm and familiar. For a moment, I simply watched her. Then I said quietly, "Mom, can I tell you something?" She smiled. "Of course." I looked down at my hands. My heart was beating fast. "I know I hurt you when I was younger." The smile disappeared. Not because she was upset, because she was listening carefully. I continued, "I shouted at you." My voice became softer. "I made you cry." The memory still hurt. "I am sorry." The room fell silent. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then my mother reached across the table and held my hand. Her eyes filled with tears. But this time, they were different tears. "I know," she whispered. I felt tears in my own eyes. "I wish I could change the past." My mother squeezed my hand. "You were hurting too." I looked at her. She smiled gently. "I always knew that." At that moment, something inside me softened. For years, I thought people only saw my anger. I never imagined they could see my pain. That conversation did not erase the past. Nothing could do that. But it helped us heal, little by little, day by day. I also reached out to old friends. Some friendships could not be repaired. Too much time had passed. Too many wounds remained. And I learned to accept that. Growth does not guarantee a second chance. Sometimes growth means respecting the consequences of the past. But some people welcomed me back into their lives, including Lily. One afternoon we sat together in a cafe. We laughed about old school memories. The conversation felt easy, comfortable, real. At one point, Lily smiled and said, "You seem different." I laughed. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." She stirred her coffee. "You're softer now." Softer. I thought about that word for a long time. When I was younger, I believed softness meant weakness. I believed strong people never cried, never apologized, never showed fear. But now I understood something important. Softness was not weakness. Softness was strength under control. It was choosing kindness when anger felt easier. It was choosing understanding when judgment felt faster. Most importantly, it was learning to be kind to myself. For years, I blamed myself for everything. I hated the angry child I used to be. I wished I could erase her completely. But slowly, I stopped fighting her. That child had survived the only way she knew how. She was not my enemy. She was a hurt little girl asking for help. I was finally ready to listen. Years passed. Life continued moving forward. The angry little girl I used to be slowly became a memory. Not a forgotten memory, but a quieter one. A memory that no longer controlled my life. I finished college. I started working. I built healthy friendships. I learned how to communicate when I felt hurt. I learned how to listen when others felt hurt. Most importantly, I learned that healing was not a finish line. It was a daily choice. Some days were easier than others, but I kept choosing it. One spring morning, I started a new job at a community center. Many children came there after school. Some needed help with homework. Some needed a safe place to spend time. Some simply needed someone to listen. I enjoyed the work. The children reminded me how complicated feelings could be, especially when nobody taught you how to understand them. One afternoon, I heard shouting from a nearby room. A young girl was crying. She kicked a chair. She threw a pencil across the floor. Her face was red with anger. Several adults stood nearby. They looked frustrated. One person said, "She never listens." Another sighed, "She's always causing problems." The girl shouted even louder, "No one understands me." The room became silent. The moment I heard those words, my heart stopped. Because I had said those exact words many years ago, again and again, I looked at the little girl, and suddenly it felt like I was looking into a mirror. Not at who I was now, at who I used to be. The anger, the sadness, the loneliness hidden underneath. I knew that expression. I knew that pain. The adults stepped back. Some looked annoyed. Some looked tired. The girl crossed her arms and stared at the floor. Nobody knew what to say. So I quietly walked over and sat beside her. I did not lecture her. I did not tell her to calm down. I did not tell her she was wrong. For a while, I simply sat there, just as the old man had once sat beside me in the park. The girl glanced at me, then looked away. A few minutes passed. Finally, I spoke, very softly. "Did something hurt your heart?" The girl froze. The room became completely silent. She looked at me again. This time her eyes were full of surprise, as if nobody had ever asked her that question before. Her lips trembled. For several seconds, she tried to stay strong. Then the tears came. She buried her face in her hands and cried. Really cried. Not angry tears. Not frustrated tears. Painful tears. The kind that had been waiting a long time. Between sobs, she whispered, "My friends don't want to play with me anymore." My chest tightened. I remembered Lily. I remembered sitting alone at lunch. I remembered believing that everyone hated me. The little girl continued, "They say I'm mean." A tear rolled down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, because I understood, more than she could ever know. I gently said, "That must hurt." She nodded. No anger, no fighting, just honesty. The feeling she had been hiding all along. Over the next few weeks, we spent time together. We talked, we drew pictures. Sometimes we sat quietly. Slowly, she began learning something that had taken me years to learn. Feelings are not enemies. They are messages. And when we listen carefully, they tell us what we need. One afternoon, she handed me a small drawing. Two people sat on a bench under a tree. One was a little girl. The other was an adult woman. Above them, she had written, "Thank you for listening." I smiled, but my eyes filled with tears, because suddenly I was not only thinking about her, I was thinking about myself, about the girl I used to be, the girl who shouted, the girl who pushed people away, the girl who felt broken. For years I had tried to leave her behind. For years I had been embarrassed by her, ashamed of her, angry at her. But standing there with that drawing in my hands, I finally understood something. She was never the villain of my story. She was a child carrying pain she did not understand. A child trying to protect herself. A child doing her best. That evening after work, I went for a walk. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and gold. The air felt warm, peaceful. I found myself standing in the same park where I had once met the old man. The same trees, the same paths, the same wooden bench. I sat down and watched the sunset. The years seemed to fold together. The angry child, the lonely teenager, the confused college student, the woman I had become. All of them were still part of me, and for the first time, I welcomed them. A gentle smile appeared on my face. Then I whispered words I had waited my whole life to say. Thank you for surviving. The wind moved softly through the trees. My eyes filled with tears. But I was smiling. I'll take care of us now. And somehow, in that quiet moment, I felt an answer deep inside my heart. The fight was over. Not because life had become perfect, not because pain had disappeared, but because I had finally stopped fighting myself. The world had not changed. I had. And when I learned to treat myself with kindness, I finally learned how to treat the world with kindness too. That was the day I truly understood something important. Some people spend years learning how to love others. Some people first need to learn how to love themselves. No matter how long it takes, that journey is worth making. And sometimes, the most beautiful peace comes when you finally forgive the person you used to be.